Well, there are theories that the government used mind control on this town back in the 60s.
Indrid came to West Virginia. He hitchhiked his way across the Ohio. Bought himself a big black car, blew some minds near and far. Said, hey, bud, flying high with the Mothman. Said, hey, pal, flying high with the Mothman. From way up in the canyon, acting like some kind of Charlie Manson, but he never lost his cool, making ultra-terrestrials drool. Hey, bud, flying high with the Mothman. Said, hey, pal, flying high with the Mothman. Came to the TNT, got some phone calls from the CIA. Bigfoot scat was something to fear, aliens coming up the rear. Said, hey, squids, flying high with the Mothman. Said, hey, Biggs, flying high with the Mothman.
I'll tell you the truth. This is a confession of sorts. I talked to Dick about this too. I'll always blame myself right down the line, because I just feel like I should have done more early on. I just feel terrible. I always feel sad about it, because I could have reached out. I could have saved him somehow, but I just didn't. I was too scared. I was too scared off by whatever that darkness was. It was so dark.
Say, David, in your defense, you guys were so young, and it's so easy to look, later on in our lifespan back upon what maybe we thought we should have done back then, but we know more now than we did then. And you've got perspective in your favor now as well, too. There probably really was nothing else you could have done. I'm sure as a friend, you did as much as you could.
I did what I knew to do. It was like he was, it was as if he was trying to fight back, and that's the heartbreaking part, because that guy would come to the surface once in a while, but it's just so heartbreaking, and to lose him. And even now I have a bunch of old tapes and recordings, and I hear that guy, and I just miss that guy so much.
Yeah.
That young, fun friend. I mean, Daniel was never normal. He was always eccentric and hilarious, and just an odd person. But he wasn't crazy until later.
One of the reasons that I mentioned that I thought it was more likely to be schizophrenia is because schizophrenia manifests later in life. And so a person can be reasonably, quote unquote, normal, if there really is such a thing as normal. And then later on, as they develop, that schizophrenia has been tracking, and all of a sudden it takes over. We've seen this in our family, both with my younger half brother and with my brother-in-law. They both were bipolar schizophrenic. And the guy that was there, I mean, one minute he'd be totally lucid and totally normal, and then the next he'd be attacking me on social media or all of a sudden it was all about, what they were doing through our television to come infiltrate us and all this kind of craziness, which may or may not be legit. I'm not totally discounting that, but it's certainly crazy talk
Yeah.
in modern conversation, if you follow what I'm saying.
Yep, for sure. Oh yeah, no, Dan would be like that. He had these very intricate theories about Taco Bell and Mexican food and all this really deep paranoia, things like that. Bill, I'd be interested in your professional life. Did you run into a lot of schizophrenics that would lock onto religious imagery?
Let me step back from that for a minute because I want to share with you my professional walk has been in technology sales. I went back to school to be able to get the master's and the doctorate in psychology, but I've always had a lifelong fascination with psychology. But I do think that just my personal opinion, and I guess with a little bit of history and scholarship at this point, would say that I think that religious ideology, especially when it's adhered to dogmatically without regard for logic whatsoever, can certainly be something that people who have those mental illnesses will grab onto and try to make some sense out of life with, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess I saw it. This is always a sore point with Dick Johnston and I, that there would be I felt like, when you live deeply in a religious or biblical or whatever, the Quran, whatever, when you live with a lot of belief in figures that you don't interact with, don't see in front of you daily, you're, in a way, it's like living in an alternative or in sort of an unreal place. And that's got to loosen your moorings a little bit. I mean, you can't just constantly picture a fictional or imaginary place as real without that damaging in you in some way.
And I think it certainly can. And that's one of the reasons that I say dogmatic or fundamentalist beliefs, that kind of a thing. The way that I like to describe my own personal faith is just as a matter of open architecture. Christianity at the fundamental end of it, in terms of grounding, but like Andy's talking about, I see quickly where there are Buddhist truths. I see quickly where there are truths in the Quran. I see quickly where there's universality. I think there's an essence of good that's at the core of all of those religions, and I don't necessarily buy 100% into any of them.
I mean, any of those systems, they've been tainted by contact with humanity for many centuries. So, you can't take them. They're not pure anymore. That's for sure.
Right.
But I was always convinced that Dan didn't, for many, many years, long before I even suspected, I don't think he really knew the difference between Jesus, God, Satan, Captain America, the Hulk, Spider-Man. I think that was just one big universe for him, and it was just kind of like they were all equally real and equally active in reality.
It's really interesting that you say that, because I hadn't pinpointed it until you said it, but that is exactly what the documentary showed. Even Casper the Friendly Ghost, or even Mountain Dew for that matter.
There you go. Yeah. I mean, that's what I mean by, in a way, like living in that sort of a world. I mean, as you know yourself, he's got Captain America fighting Satan and Jesus stepping in, and I mean, it's when you grow up, you got the Bible in one hand and Marvel Comics in the other. Eventually, they're going to blend together.
Sure.
And I think that's that's partly what when Dan's illness reared up, it locked onto that and ran with it.
Isn't it similar to how alcoholics sometimes seem to be possessed, like by the spirits, the alcohol being the spirits?
It's actually called the spirits. I mean, you're right there. Yeah.
Absolutely. And the best we can do is just, it presents as possession because it looks like a different person. It's a different person.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I don't know that there's anything wrong with saying that, really. I mean, is science going to catch up and acknowledge someday that maybe that's a thing? I mean, it doesn't mean a spirit necessarily entered them, but somehow their mind went in that direction and created another person. And this is the replacement theory thing I'm on to right now. I'm just like, keeps coming up. The replacing of one thing with another is so prevalent in our society. And in the paranormal world, it's epidemic. It's like, take a story that you can get clicks with it, replace it or change it, and move and sell it. And I've heard that Hillman, who was a psychologist, Bill may know him, I forget his first name. Hillman had a theory that nothing can become big as a meme unless it's changed or falsified or replaced. Like this, everyone has to feel that they can, that the mind is like a wind or water, and it wants to go where it wants to go. And it'll move in and just co-opt things. And then once feels like it's got it, it's a new thing now. They've replaced what was already there with their own version. And this is playing out in AI and creators on the web who are changing all sorts of stories and memes and folklore. Now, there's different directions I could go. I have some observations about Daniel's art. What do we have? I have some spooky stuff that happened with me and Daniel.
Ooh, I'd like to hear that. I'd like to hear all that. Yeah.
I guess one thing I would say is that I have a naive mind too, and I've always kind of retained it. And it's that kid who's out in the woods, just staring at nature. And so sometimes I get really duped by people because the naivete is still there. They call it the beginner's mind in Buddhism. You're supposed to hang on to it. But I can see having that, knowing my own mind, a beginner's mind, that if it got twisted a bit under the right stress, you would flip to being really righteously angry at those who won't do the right thing. Because in the naive mind or the beginner's mind, it's the stuff that you do in kindergarten. It's treat others as you treat as you would want to be treated. The 10 Commandments, the basics. And when those are sullied by people, that beginner's mind gets real pissed off. And most of us just can turn it off. But, Daniel couldn't always turn it off.
Right, yeah. In fact, I'd say he went through his whole life. I know he did with beginner's mind. He never achieved mature wisdom in any way. He always stayed sort of a child, maybe 14, something like that.
It's interesting you say that, and I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, it's okay.
It's interesting you say that because as we were watching the movie for the second time yesterday afternoon, I'd made a comment about Daniel and his age, because at the time he looked like he was in his 60s, although I know he wasn't. And Jackie said, I don't think he's at all conscious of how old he is. And now that you say that, he did seem to have that naivete to him. And like Andy was just talking about, I kind of have what he has as well too. And my I guess child mind manifests in that I like everybody. Out of the gate, I will like everybody, even to the point where I start feeling like maybe I'm a little more leveraged in that relationship than they are. I literally have to be stabbed in the back or punched right in the mouth before I realize that somebody might not have my best interests at heart.
Yeah.
So I get that. I can relate to that. But I think it's one of the things that makes me and uniquely me as well. And yes, I have to guard against those things. But at the same point in time, I don't want to totally lose that because I think it's a gift. I think it's something I'm really grateful to have.
Yeah, no, I'm sure there are many heartbroken, cynical people that would love to feel like that for half an hour, to be open-hearted like that. For sure. Yeah. My wife's that way. She's quite a bit like Daniel, actually. She's sweet and to a certain degree, kind of innocent. And, so I know that very much, and that's actually one of the things about Dan too, that made me always wonder, what was going on with him. I've never seen anyone physically change as much as Daniel did from his youth. I mean, if you look at him in, you know, when he was in 20 years old or something to a couple months before he died, it's not the same person. I mean, it's not just age either. You know, it's wear and tear from all the medication and but it just awful. I mean, just really
I'd say those last 20 minutes of the documentary, he looked weary. He looked so tired. I mean, just so tired.
Well, I'll tell you, the only thing, the last couple of months, last maybe 6 months, maybe a year of his life, the only thing that even kept him connected to humanity was simple courtesy. Just if somebody would speak to him, he would speak back to them. He would say thank you. If they would, oh, Daniel, we love you. Thank you, thank you. But other than that, he could not care less about being alive. He just didn't know how to die. But he had no interest in existing much longer. You could tell.
That's sad.
He was done. Yeah. But
one thing I noticed in Austin, if you don't mind me interjecting here, was I could see that there was this stuff going on. I didn't know what name to give it, but you know, this is like 1985, I guess.
Right.
That was a window, I think, where we felt like we could maybe help him. I think he had come back from I had known him before he went to the circus, unless McDonald's came after the circus. Did McDonald's come after the circus?
It came after.
Okay. So that's where I met him. And I would just go in and sit and eat, and he would act like he was cleaning. You know, we just talked. And then there was he was staying at that church, and I could just tell, I think that was around the time his first, that may have been the acid and all that stuff came around the same time. But what got me was people were sort of celebrating him as celebrating the illness, sort of like in high school, we kept electing. We would always elect people that were the last people you'd ever think would be student body president, like as almost as a mascot or something, to I guess virtue signal amongst the population of the school that we weren't the type of people that wanted that were trying to one up everybody. We acknowledged our handicapped, or whatever the word you want to call it, students, and we always had students with some form of handicap as a student body president. And it seemed like kind of like that, where people should have been more serious about his well-being, but instead we're celebrating the novelty of it or something. And I think that may have contributed to everyone just not doing the best they could do.
Absolutely. So at that time, especially, that's what his song "Monkey in a Zoo" is about. You know, he was. I mean, it was like African American entertainers in the 50s and 60s. They were great as long as they were up there entertaining you, but we wanted nothing to do with them after that. You know, that's how Daniel was.
Oh wow! So
yeah, Daniel. He was. They didn't want it. It wasn't. You wouldn't date him, but you would let him entertain you. You know.
Wow.
It was. Yeah. It was like that in West Virginia. Quite honestly.
Yeah, I didn't pick up that vibe from the movie, but again, like now that you mentioned it, it does make sense. You can kind of see it if you read between the lines.
Sure. Yeah. He would only ever. I mean, even in West Virginia, except for there was a little core group of people that had kind of come together, that we stood out a bit in the Ohio Valley, and we kind of clung together. And Daniel was one of those. And that's the kind of people he attracted his whole life. That's why he belonged in Austin, quite honestly, because that's what, this whole place is, the island of misfit toys. So he just belonged here. But
right.
Even here, the people here were the sort of marginal folks, that would hang around with them. And I mean, and he knew people like in West Virginia, he knew like retired boxers. He would hang around with old people. He would hang around with middle-aged women. He was 20 years old. He was hanging around with me, and I was completely a lost soul. So it was just he never really connected to the mainstream.
He was a wonderful guy, though. He had a great heart. He came to our very first show, Ed Hall, and it was really obscure, and I don't know how I even knew about it, but he was just supportive and never had a bad thing to say.
He was always like that. And if any artist, any kind of art form at any level, they would show it to him, and he always had this, wow, that's really great. Wow, that's great. Come on, do some more. Hey, that's really great. That was his whole attitude all the time.
I was
thinking, go ahead, Andy.
Well, I was just going to say, when you described him as, he doesn't think about what he's going to do next. He just grabs something and goes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure.
I noticed like towards the end of the documentary when they were saying that like 98% of his drawings had sold out before the art show even opened up. And I told Jackie, I said, I wonder how much money that was. And as I was saying that to her, I thought, I'll bet Daniel could care less. I don't think he even really cared about the money.
Right. In fact, I'll tell you, he used to tell us, he would say, I'll take you guys out for pizza or whatever. I'm 1,000 air. And actually, he was a low-end millionaire. He just had no idea. He had no idea.
How about that? Yeah. I hope somebody helped take care of his money for him.
His brother did.
Good,
yeah.
Good. Glad to hear that.
Did a good job with it too. Yeah.
Glad to hear that.
Yeah. There's still money coming in. Still money. He had no idea how much money he was making or had, or he didn't even know how much things cost. Honestly,
you gotta love that. You just gotta love that.
He just didn't think about it. Yeah, he was. And Daniel was. He had plenty of money, and at one time I went with him we went to Houston to a record store, and he was going through a bunch of bin of records, and just he picked out 5 or 6, the Jackie Gleason Orchestra, and like that, and in these things, and he takes him up to the front. He said, "Can I trade these for some drawings?" And he handed the guy, like 500 drawings. And they're worth $1,000 a piece. These drawings.
Wow.
And he was just carry them around, and so what I did was I secretly went up and paid the guy for the records, and then took the drawings back and made sure that they would end up at Daniel's house again. He just had no idea.
Oh my God.
Yeah, he would just trade drawings for things, and just do drawings and trade them away. Yeah, and I mean,
do we know who bought all those drawings? Do we know who's the biggest buyer?
I would say
Matt Groening.
Yeah, Matt has some. Jeff Tartar Sauce, we call him Tartar Sauce. Jeff Tartikoff, his ex-manager, has a bunch. There's a collector in California that I talk to once in a while. He has a bunch. My family has a bunch. Kathy has some. I have some. Yeah,
we're talking thousands, right? Thousands of drawings, right?
Oh, I would say, hundreds of thousands. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. He drew constantly, all the time. It was just always drawing, just cranking. I mean, you got to remember, these are just ballpoint pen and marker on typing paper. So it was just, it was a machine.
He reminds me of a friend of mine who's now deceased, Bruce Bickford, who was a claymation artist who worked with Frank Zappa. Bruce drew constantly as well and had thousands of drawings in his house. Yeah, and I hope they're turning it into a museum, because it's like Daniel a lot, and Bruce was a lot like Daniel. Super beginner's mind all the time. It was tragic. I mean, he was attacked by the same pit bull twice, and that's what basically did him in.
Ouch.
Just walking around the neighborhood and these stupid neighbors. I mean, Bruce had shows all over Europe like Daniel. But one thing about Daniel's, I wanted to say, and I've never been a comic book person, ever. Never, ever even looked at one, really. But from an art point of view, One thing I noticed is he's in that camp of I've sort of got these two camps of artists, and some people blend them. But one is the person who uses figure to ground really heavily. Like there's a whole composition there. These types of artists do drawings of things, like Daniel, on paper, of objects, people. There's no real setting for it in the real world, right? He took that about as far as you could go, I think, really, especially the ones with his sister helping him with the photos and putting little snippets of photos in there, really changes it in a way and makes it more interesting to me. I was talking to Bill about this the other day. Like, what are these two types of people, these two types of artists, and what does it mean for some people's minds to go in the one direction versus the other?
That's a very interesting distinction.
The extremes of it would be the most visible, because I think everybody's kind of in the middle with that. I like to put things in the middle often, but I also am really working with the rest of it and trying to blend the two. So
I would kind of see the way I see, what that distinction really breaks down to is kind of a form and content. By the way, hey, Jackie, how you doing? Hi. It's kind of a form and content duality. He would, the content would be, where they're drawing the things, because it's a narrative. It's about these things. And then the form will be more where they're worried about the composition. They're trying to make the thing seem like a little world. And those two things, form and content, really came together for Dan, which is why I think he really made, if you look at his drawings, especially the middle period, there's really, it's a world. It's a little world where the form, the content and the form dictate each other. And so it's a little place that those characters inhabit. And, and that's why when Jason Nodler made that musical, he made the Daniel Johnston musical and he put it on stage. And what he had done brilliantly was they had constructed costumes and sets that brought that Daniel world to life. There were people running around that looked like it was scared the shit. It was so frightening because that thing had escaped from the drawings and there it was. It was really horrifying.
Were these people with costumes on?
Yeah, they were Jeremiah the Frog was right there. The guys with the tops of their heads missing were running around. It was really, really scary to see them real, so Daniel drew in that way where the backgrounds, the composition was a world that those characters inhabited perfectly. And, they kind of seemed to me like, okay, that's fine because they're in there and I'm over here. But when they got out of there, it got scary, because, and I always felt like that was sort of like what it was like in Dan's head. It had a little bit of that. I don't know how familiar, like, Giorgio de Chirico or, Salvador Dali, the surrealists, that sort of empty, flat plane with the long perspective kind of vibe. The sets
he didn't even draw the little line of the horizon back there. He didn't even do that, right?
There would just be sort of a hint.
Yes, a hint. There's a hint of distance.
Right. It's just a little something. Like his whole book, Space Ducks.
Yeah, I have.
Look at that one. The way they're in space, but they're kind of not in space. They're on the page, but they're sort of breaking the page. It's a really interesting way he deals with habitats. Where these things exist. They're kind of real and not real at the same time. They're three-dimensional and flat simultaneously. Yeah, just really interesting. And it always seemed to me like that, in a way, is what it was kind of like. Must have been sort of like that in his head, kind of a, like this surrealistic landscape almost inhabited by all these characters running around. And, it really felt like that I mean, even early on, and until they kind of took over and started driving the bus. But yeah, it was. So his drawings are really pretty much a reflection of the way he thought. I'd say that whole form and content crossover.
Is form and content? I'm speaking here with an art professor. Is form and content the same as figure ground?
You would use figure ground to establish either an emphasis on form or on content. What figure ground implies is that you're aware of the compositional possibilities of the space, so you're trying to make it look real by putting something behind it. That's what the figure ground relationship implies. So say you're trying to create a little world, the ground would be just as important as the figure. You're trying to make the place seem real. If you're not interested in that, you would only be interested in the figure.
Yes.
Right. So figure ground is a tool that you would use to make form and content go one way or the other.
To place it into perspective and context.
Exactly. Yeah. It would provide a context or not, whatever you chose to do.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I noticed Daniel's eyeball guy, to me, looks like a Mothman type thing. But back then, I didn't really even know it was called Mothman, so I couldn't ask
right.
Daniel about that.
Do you mean this guy? That's Vile Corrupt.
Not
Vile
that guy.
Corrupt. Yeah, you mean just the two eyeballs.
The eyeball, the flying eyeball, which in the movie is described as representing death.
Yeah, the eyeball with two wings.
Yeah, and now I know Mothman kind of represents death for some people, and the Thunderbird does in the native.
Right.
Garuda, not so much. But is that your understanding that that's what he was trying, that represented death?
Yeah, well, he, Dan was funny that way. He would only pin down the meanings of things if he was asked, and even then it would change from time to time, the meaning of something, and even then he would say something different to say, like, a pretty girl. Like that would be one meaning. To a friend of his would be another meaning, because he was always trying. He was helpless around an attractive female. He would just come apart. So he would tell them whatever they wanted to hear or whatever wouldn't scare them away, basically. Yeah. So you
did he say anything about Mothman ever? Did you talk to him about it?
We talked about the Indrid Cold more. We talked about Indrid Cold quite a bit. Yeah. We talked about at the time, a big force in Daniel and I's friendship was Kurt Vonnegut and Slaughterhouse-Five specifically, and so we would talk about being unstuck in time, and we would talk about how Indrid Cold was probably unstuck in time. You just pop in and out, go here and there, and take any form wanted to, because it really just seemed like my experiences and experiences of people that we knew, they seemed like somebody that didn't have any physical limitations, or at least the same ones we had. So we would talk about Indrid Cold quite a bit.
That's a really interesting angle too, because of how he would refer, or when he would speak, like to Woody Derenberger after their encounters, "I will see you in time."
Right, exactly. In fact, I saw that the other day in it was so mind-blowing. What was I looking? Oh, that's right. I have a lot of things built around trickster theory and trickster mythology, a lot of my belief systems. And I was reading some stuff about Hermes, one of the early trickster figures. And that was a thing that was in Hermes, was the idea of whenever he would interact with a mortal, he would talk to them about seeing them in time, or how they would meet again in time. I dropped the book. It was I thought I've only heard this one other place in time, and so that right away dovetailed with my theory that Cold and Ardo and all it's a trickster phenomenon. In fact, I think Keel's whole belief, Keel is the only person that has figured it out as far as I'm concerned. The idea that there's something under the surface that becomes all of these things. I've been reading about do you know what the skull experiment is? Have you heard this at all? It's a group in England. They got together and they were very curious about the spirit what's it called? Anyway, spirit contact experimentation at the turn of the century. And so they said, well, let's try this ourselves, right? And so they spent 20 years, this little same group, meeting together to do seances and with the old traditional seance materials to see if they could contact the dead or whatever. And they did, of course, and in very like specific ways, just like the spiritualism. That's what I was trying to think of. The spiritualism movement did the same thing, like seances, rapping, levitating tables, the whole thing. And I thought, you dumb sons of bitches, you're being tricked. This is trickster phenomenon, right down the line. And it's what it seems like to me. So I mean, they're opening themselves up for it. And so, I mean, it's like a circus troupe, like the whole Indrid Cold and that whole crowd. They travel around like a little circus troupe, just having fun with us, as far as I can tell. Keel nailed that.
He did. He really did. And Andy as well. I mean, both of them in their research have identified that the more you interact with the phenomena interacts with you. And before you know it, I mean, all kinds of manifestations are coming along the lines of your belief system or what you're expecting or what you start projecting what you expect. And it takes upon a life of its own. It's really fascinating stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I remember writing about Hermes in relation to the Garuda. There's some relationship, symbology wise, but Indrid, when he hypnotized our family, he did ask about time. Some weird question about time.
I'm sure.
Like what time do you think it is or something?
Oh, that's fascinating.
So Andy, Hermes is the messenger, right?
Yes.
Isn't Hermes the messenger of the gods?
Yeah.
So if we follow along the whole Garuda ideology of Mothman being a first responder, as you've spoken to multiple times over the years, maybe it's the same phenomenon.
And I think it may have been triggered by the deaths in our family. It may be that these guys come around, if it's supernatural, which it does seem to me to be supernatural somehow. But the weird thing is, and what do you call this? The fact that I keep looking for physical evidence of a real person who may have been a spook or a hypnotist. And you can find enough there to make you believe that it's a real thing.
Sure.
And what do you call that? Is that replacement theory?
Trickster.
Jaci is here. The postmaster.
That's somebody, to me, that's somebody that's got the bait on a string and they're pulling the string, making you follow the bait.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
For sure. I've seen it myself.
Well, even in the Mothman prophecies, I mean, I don't think that the term descent into madness is ever stated in the Mothman prophecies, but you certainly can see Keel as he gets more and more rabid about trying to get these messages out that he's receiving intel from Paul, Agar, whoever it's coming from, telling him that Kennedy's going to be assassinated, Robert Kennedy for that matter, or Martin Luther King, or even the sitting Pope who was allegedly going to be assassinated, but that was stopped. Keel was getting crazier and crazier down to the point that the chemical plant, he thought a chemical plant was going to blow, and it was the Silver Bridge. But much like you were talking about your friend Daniel, Keel blamed himself for not being able to save the people from that. He should have put two and two together. How do you do that? How do you put two and two together and figure anything like that out from the stuff you're getting from these different sources that aren't coming to you in a linear way, and they're not really pointing to anything tangible? You have to piece them together.
Especially with a huge decoy like the chemical plant right there. Of course, that's what you would think.
Yep.
You know, yeah, you'd never suspect the bridge.
Which is really interesting in Andy's research, that so much of his research is connected to chemical plants because of things that were going on in Carbide and these different facilities where things were happening that shouldn't have been happening.
That I definitely, yeah, and that, boy, does that ever bring us back to West Virginia, like Andy was saying, that whole area for sure. Do you know, it's very interesting, the Kennedy assassination, right before, in the couple of years leading up to that, in 62, 61, there were, well, actually specifically 62 and early 63, there were Oswald impersonators popping up everywhere. You know, I mean,
one of my favorite topics.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And that's straightforward trickster shape-shifting phenomena right there, where, you know, I mean, especially the idea of, like, look over here, that whole thing, that's so classic. Yeah.
Wow. And I'm sure Andy's probably entertained this idea, but I don't know that I've heard it stated that maybe that second Oswald was a doppelganger.
John Armstrong's what's it called? Is it called the second Oswald? No.
It's
Are you familiar with John Armstrong's work?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I got to hear him lecture in Dallas.
Oh,
yeah. In fact, it's in the other room, but I have the book.
Oh, you're hardcore then. You're like
yeah,
on the JFK,
I
man.
can't see it, but there's a huge bookshelf over there sagging with Kennedy JFK assassination books.
Awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
We got to do a conspiracy show.
I am in.
Because the second Oswald is the most fascinating thing. I think Armstrong nailed it, though. If you look at all these records, there were two kids named Lee and Harvey, and they looked alike. Like,
definitely.
They were 3 inches difference in height, though.
And I mean, in the Marines, there's a guy in California, there's a guy in Japan at the same time.
Yeah.
There's
they were even at the same junior high for like a month at the same time.
Right. and for that matter, Marguerite, there are probably two Marguerites as well.
Yeah. Oh, that's really obvious when you look at it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those two are so different. Well,
hey, if we're going to take a break, let me grab a sandwich.
Let's do the break. I'll come back with I can talk a little bit about my stuff with Daniel that we experienced supernaturally. And then we can maybe jump into some questions about art, culture, Austin, slackers, that whole mythos.
I'm in.
I'll play a song here. Oh, go ahead.
I would just think if we're going to talk about the music scene, I mean, Kathy McCarty, my wife, is one of the biggest musicians in Austin. She knows way more about it than I do. But
I thought about having her and doing that. And if we were to do a second show, that's what I was thinking.
There you go.
Give her a little heads up.
Yeah.
You know, about it. She can watch this thing and see what she thinks.
For sure.
But I was going to play this song here. It's only a couple minutes, and then I'll just jump to something else, I guess. But it's when Daniel would play, when he played this at that song I recorded, that concert in 2001 that I recorded, there was some guy who kept asking for the song Psycho Nightmare. Psycho Nightmare every time. And Daniel finally is just trying to talk the guy down. He's like, we're going to do the song, man. Don't worry. So I'm trying to find, anyway, so we did I told him about this and I tried to get some input from him, but he did approve of it. Now, what's the name of it? Can't remember the name of it. It's a weird little thing. Okay. Prepare yourself. It's experimental, but it's got the exact guy from the show. I recorded the show. So like I had him tape. So I put him in this very strange little song. It's one version of a song I've done over 50 times called Screaming for Recognition. Psycho Nightmare Mix. did.
When your good throater
Just a little ditty for an ad or something.
must answer.
It's called Mothman Bird.
Yeah, man. Yeah, nerd. Yeah, 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 man. Yeah, nerd. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, that is the squonk. I just bought one of these suckers on Etsy.
Good Lord.
And I should have consulted the postmaster first.
Kind of like simultaneously cute and horrifying.
Yes, the squonk is an amazing thing. And the story continues to evolve. Oh, the motto is a motto I heard recently that I enjoyed was hate the belief, not the believer. That's a pretty good one, isn't it?
That works, yeah.
Stop overthinking. That's one little thing I haven't mentioned. I keep hearing stop overthinking. And then, but I changed it to stop overthinking. Stop overthinking is what you do. Is what you do in an Eastern Asian practice. You're jumping provisionally from little island to little island of belief, and you can't really stay on any of them, right? Because that's just you're going to end up locked in a rabbit hole. So you just got to keep jumping, keep on stopping over.
I like that.
Stop over.
That's really good. Yeah. That's very useful. I can see. Yeah, that's really good.
I feel like I've contributed to humanity today.
That is a good one. And I don't know how many people will actually understand that. I mean, as far as humanity, but
I'll bet our listeners do understand that. I'll bet they can relate.
I'm sure they can. I'm sure they can.
But to segue then into one thing about Mothman and JFK was there was a Mothman sighting the night before JFK got shot.
Really?
In England.
Really?
In England, yes. The Sandling Park sightings. And it was attached with or associated with a UFO, a very large kind of, I can't remember what shape it was. But a couple of nights after that, they saw this huge foot thing floating over the football field there.
How was can I ask how the Mothman was, so it would have been 11/21. How was it described?
Really similar to Mothman.
Really?
They call it the Sandling Park something or other. Owlman. I think they originally called it an Owlman.
Mm.
But Nick Redfern and others have looked into it, and they seem to think it's really similar to Mothman. What was Mothman doing over there? How does that symbolism fit in? And I'll tell you what I think, and it's going to seem far out, but I'm one of the few JFK people. Oh, since you're into JFK, you can go back and forth with me on this. The British connection to the JFK assassination. Have you ever looked into that or thought
only only a little bit by way of Umbrella Man and JFK's father being the ambassador. You can connect. You can go through that connection. And then I guess there are a couple other little connections. And what's his name? The guy that did The Men Who Killed Kennedy for the BBC. He talked about that a little bit.
Yeah.
There
is one more, and that's JFK's sister. She was married to a British royal.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Inherited a huge estate and castle and everything. She was like Duchess of something or other. Very obscure story. I saw a documentary on it once, and I said, "Wow, I didn't even know that."
I didn't. Which sister?
She was a troublemaker. She's a typical free-spirited American woman, and you can imagine growing up on Long Island, Southampton, and in the summers up there where the Trumps and the Kennedys and the Rockefellers and everybody goes,
that's great.
And live the high life. She was part of that, and from all accounts, really pissed off the royal family.
Ooh.
Because I think she may have cheated on him or was suspected of cheating. And don't quote me on
Kennedys.
but it's on Google. You can ask the chat AI, which I want to ask about later. What was that all about?
And which sister was that?
she had a funny name. She was a real tomboy. What was her name? It's kind of a cute name.
Oh, yeah.
Texie,
Yeah. Not Kath. Yeah, I know what you mean though. It's like Kit or something like that. It's like a
yes.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, we won't go into the whole British connection, but that would be, you know, that would be a way to tie that Mothman sighting in. But as far as me and Daniel goes, this thing happened, which was some part of it was portrayed in the movie where he's in the creek. And Louis Black seems to think it was during Christmas. And so I'm going to have to consult my tapes that I have hundreds of hours of, not hundreds, 200 hours of Slacker tape to go through as I do this multi-Slacker project. So, and some of these tapes have the date right on there. And I was taping that at that time there at the creek because I had a class I was taking, a performance art class with a hoity-toity New York artist lady. My project was I dig a hole at the Ed Hall house where we all lived. And little did we know at that time, I didn't know this when I was doing this digging, that someone had killed their whole family at the house, you know,
Yeah.
dark spirit there. So I dig this hole and I film it, and it's like an art performance and the symbology of digging. And then I would show the sky and have spooky sounds, the connection of earth and sky. And then I went over to the art building and I had like 3 parts to this. And I did a thing over there where I got in the basement and I had this huge contraption where I could blow and inhale energy. And so I was like doing something with that in the direction of the Ed Hall house, which is on the same creek. And I unconsciously am like pulling the energies together, not really knowing what I'm doing. I'm just trying to come up with something for class. Then I do an outside part right outside the building in the creek with Johnny Rodriguez, who was like a Mexican shaman, and I wanted Daniel to be part of it. And so I kept talking to Daniel to get him over there to do this. And Johnny says, I can't do this. There's a demon here. So he like splits. And I ended up doing it by myself and I got credit. But then Daniel comes along and I'm like, well, Johnny quit on me. Can you do this or that? And he's like, no, there's a demon here.
Really?
Yes.
And Johnny was gone.
Johnny was gone. They didn't even talk. And I go, and it seemed to me that Daniel was on something, like he might be on that Gibby acid or something, because that's around the same time.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I don't know exactly when. I don't know if this thing with the creek came before or after. I think it probably came before. No, I think Louis tried to say it was Christmas of '86, but it may be that I did this in 2017, the year after, and Daniel already had been there and figured out there was a demon. Well, fine, but why was I attracted to it then?
Right,
He didn't know about
right.
that. And why did Johnny say the same thing? And then I started thinking, I now think that because other people have seen a creature in the creek since then. It's called the Waller Creek Demon. Maybe you've heard of it. You heard of it?
Not heard of that, but I'm going to go find out.
Waller Creek Beast, maybe. So I just feel like, first of all, I now really respect Daniel's opinion. I'm like, he was right, because that spirit or whatever it was, after I did that, I think it threw me off my timeline. I think that I was affected by it somehow negatively. And I think everybody in Ed Hall house was affected negatively, although they won't admit it. And people were really vicious and mean in a way. And yet exuding a real peace and love kind of public vibe. But that and I'm not saying anybody there was at fault. It's like, this is just what would happen if any of us wandered into this situation at that age. You would kind of it would affect you and you wouldn't be aware of it. And you wouldn't be conscious yet of those kinds of things, unless you're really sensitive.
You know, we were talking about that a little bit, Andy. I'm not sure if you were on or if you had stepped away. David and I were talking about the fact that I mean, really, Daniel seemed to be somebody who it was good enough to entertain you, but not good enough to hang out with. And there was kind of like an undertone of that, which it doesn't really come out so much in the movie, but as he was explaining it to me, it made perfect sense.
Definitely. And it had always gone on. Yeah. Even in his own family, it had gone on. He was sort of the mascot of his own family.
Yeah.
And when you said that to Dan knew right away that there was a demon in that creek. That sounds exactly like the later Daniel. Because in fact, even further, you're talking about the darkness at the Ed Hall house. That's what Dan got the same way. That's the one thing he never was, and later he became, was mean. He became very mean and very harsh. And he had always been so, you know, I mean, that's why I said like courtesy is all that kept him connected, because he was so mean, but he would be courteous to fans, but to everyone else, he was very, very dark. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting.
Well, he avoided the Ed Hall house. He didn't want to come over there.
Really?
Yeah, for the same reason, I think. But I noticed some people, it looks like, I'm looking at old film the other day, I'm seeing what it looks like Stella from Glass Eye.
Yeah, from Glass Eye.
She was over there. I think he was probably invited to that yard sale because everybody showed up, it seemed like, and he wouldn't go in.
The idea of him, you know, because him being turning out to be kind of a sensitive like that. You know, the thing with Dan was he's very, kind of like Kathy again. They very much live in their own head, you know, so they're not really out. They're not connected outward. So it's interesting that he would sense something like that it would come through his own white noise in a way, because he usually wouldn't pick up on even social signals, let alone a demonic presence. Even though he did that same thing to myself and my brother one time. He almost wrecked our car because he was my brother was driving. He grabbed my brother around the neck and said, "You're demon possessed," and he started to try to grab the wheel, and it was pretty horrible.
It wasn't like you could just push him off because he apparently was really strong.
Yeah, he's very strong, and they also had that kind of when people they don't have any inhibitions, they're stronger. You know, they don't care. And yeah, he was very strong, and he was kind of big at that time.
What I was going to say with that part there was when they were talking, like his dad was talking about his strength, and you heard it a couple times during the documentary, it really kind of dovetails nicely with the idea that some other force was driving him, whether that's a mental illness or some type of spiritual possession,
right?
That he was really stronger than he should have been able to be.
Right, definitely. Yeah, he was.
So are you thinking that he was possessed?
Well, Jackie, I was talking about that earlier, and because I have, like I was telling these guys, I have no religious beliefs whatsoever. But the only time in my life I felt a darkness was around Daniel later. Late when I'd visit him near Houston, it was that whole. You go in that house today and you can still feel it. It feels dark in there. There's something wrong there. Yeah, I don't know if you guys should visit that house if you ever get a chance.
Who's there?
His nephew is living next door in what would have been his father's house. Dick's son is living there. And I could arrange it if anybody wants to visit, but yeah, Dick and his sister Margie kind of manage the house, and they're turning it into a museum eventually.
I see. That's what I was going to ask. It should be a museum.
Absolutely. Because it's still the same as he left it, basically.
Yeah, that's nice. I'm so glad to hear that.
It's incredible.
When Bill and I were watching the movie, we kind of felt like that he had become possessed, because you know, at the end, he was living at home with his parents, and they were talking about how, it's from 7 o'clock until afternoon before he got up, and then he started putting his demands on them. And he then wanted to go shopping, or he wanted tea made, or this or that. And it's like he was drinking Mountain Dew in the front of the car, and his eyes just looked like they were like almost black and no life left in them or something.
I saw that. That's the face I saw a few times. Yeah, his face would just go blank and his eyes would go black.
And they talked about that in the documentary also when he was in the creek. I think it was when he was in the creek. It was being described that his eyes had rolled back into his head like they were all white. Was that you, David? I can't remember who that was. Was talking about that.
That was probably one of the butthole surfers, because they were talking about the same thing at the time. He was hanging around. But he would look like what it looked like to me was like he was dead. That's the only thing I can describe it as. He looked dead.
Of course, there's a satanic connection. Well, not really, but it seems there's an aura in the butthole surfers and Gibby's their whole thing about their song where they go Satan, Satan, Satan.
Right.
And that was really big at that time, them doing that. And with the Naked Dancer, I filmed one of their shows, which will be in Multislacker. Some of it.
You can imagine how this kid, he's completely raised on, this heavy duty Church of Christ religious background. He comes from West Virginia and he comes to this, he's never lived in a city before. And he comes to this city and people are singing about Satan. I mean, it turned him inside out.
Sure.
Now, knowing Gibby as I do, I don't think he's a Satanist.
Sure.
It's just an act.
Yeah.
I mean, he took my shotgun act out on the road, made it famous. So, but I want to say I was the first guy to have the shotgun on the stage.
Now, Jackie talked about something when we were watching the documentary, maybe the first time through it, when he was getting the dental work done. And the interviewer asked him, did you give him the hit of acid? And he said, no, I didn't do that. She said, no, he's full of shit. He did do that.
And he rubbed his nose real good for you to let it,
Yeah, that's exactly it. I said, yes, he did. He gave him that acid. That was the first thing I said.
Gibby is a great guy, but he has that dark side too. And it's not satanic. It's just like bullying. Like first time I met him, he put a cigarette out of my ear. and Teresa goes, who's the girl with the fetus and Slacker, who was in the band, she goes, oh, he only does that to people he likes. And so that diffused the situation. And I can just sit and hang out with him any day of the week. And it's just a good time. And he's got a great sense of humor. But I do think he screwed up there. He did. He needs to admit it.
Yeah. Well, at the time.
If he did it.
He did it, Andy. I know he did it.
He's a trickster, that guy. He is. I mean.
Well, if you do acid and you know Daniel, why wouldn't you want to see him tripping?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, he would, to me, that would be like, this would be awesome. This will be awesome to see what he's like on acid.
And it would be kind of like welcome to the party too, be kind of like, hey, let's welcome to the party, Daniel. That's kind of the feeling. It wasn't malicious, I'm sure. It was more like,
yeah.
But he had no idea Daniel couldn't handle it. Daniel, he'd never touched alcohol, and now all of a sudden he's doing acid.
I took that same acid, and it was the worst thing ever. It was horrible. I mean, the experience was terrifying. Terrifying.
I can imagine.
Absolute worst night of my life, probably.
Wow.
It's right up there. It was not pleasant.
Gibby acid.
Yeah, the Gibby acid, man. That was the only time that was it for me. That was my one time. I tried that other stuff once, ecstasy or something, a couple times. And I found that I couldn't think the next day. Like I forgotten how to type or something.
Oh my God.
So, I'm not doing that anymore.
No, that had to have been scary.
That's like sniffing Pam. Back in West Virginia, the guys used to sniff Pam.
Well, hey, that's better than summoning.
David knows what I'm talking about. Okay. Probably knows somebody.
Do we even know how much acid he was given? I mean, was he just given a hit or was he given more than a hit?
I could find out. Actually, Kathy knows all that. Knows that whole story. But
Well, it
yeah,
sounds like he took it all summer then, didn't he? Based upon what I heard in the movie.
with Caroline. Yeah.
That's what I can't imagine because it was just so scary and negative. I mean, but maybe that's just where I was.
Well, I mean, for him too, it even if it would have been pleasant, it would have been scary just because it was, so unrealistic, so disconnected. You know, he wasn't used to that.
This reminds me of something. I think I have a little window into glimpsing what that would be like for Daniel. There's been a few times, maybe a handful of times in my life, I've taken, it's usually a form of codeine. And then there's also something the opposite involved, like caffeine, some upper and some downer together. And I've just had reality start blending with my dream state really heavily. So whatever I dreamed about the night before was right there and interfering with my view of normal reality. I mean, it is unbelievably scary because you don't know what's going on and you don't know how to stop it.
Let me ask you about that. That's so fascinating because it's a thing where the dream that you had the night before, or maybe even that, like in the past few days, reappears in front of you and you feel like you're in it. Is that what you're describing? Because I've had that.
Elements of your dream are coming in well after you're awake and gone on with your day. And you're like, okay. And then some of it starts to feel like deja vu. Like a bunch
that happens to me a lot.
Oh, it's all deja vu now. What the fuck?
I'll experience something like getting out of a car and think this has just happened in a flashback to 3 years ago.
Your brain is not working normally. You know it.
Yeah.
But you can't do anything about it until in your brain, those chemicals, the two that govern the upper and downer,
serotonin.
Well, it's the adrenaline based. It's adrenaline versus the other one that relaxes you. And when you take those two substances together, you can get what's called islands in your brain where the stuff is concentrated and it mixes and somehow in your brain stays there for a while and creates islands that transmit the wrong stuff, like kind of bypass the normal channels. So you're getting stuff from this other part of your brain that you normally don't get stuff from at the same time as you're getting the other one. So your dream state, you have a dream, you're fine with that. You're awake and everything's consistent, you're fine with that. But when they start mixing, man. But it is scientifically shown, and at least I read a book about this, studying shamans in Russia who do this on purpose to see into the future. So they drink a bunch of alcohol and what's the other thing then? Some stimulant, super duper caffeine, and to create these bubbles that can last, 2, 3, 4 hours. And they fall into a stupor. And some university in Russia studied them, these shamans, so that they were able to pass through time or something. Getting back to the issue of time.
That sounds like a poor man's speedball.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It sounds like a West Virginia speedball. It really does.
I didn't say that. You said that.
Yeah. So some really strong male pouch. Right?
Yeah, there you go.
The
there
moonshine. You go. And you'd be seeing Mothman all the time.
Drink moonshine and piss on an electric fence. And there you go.
Well, to send us in a direction, I saw some recent photos have been posted in Austin type Facebook pages with photographers like Pat Blashill and Bill Leisner. I haven't posted any of my photos from that time, but I might. But there seems to be a growing awareness that the stuff that came about in 85, everyone seems to think was pivotal, that there was this thing trying to break out, which was really grunge. And it's kind of centered around the art department. People are now starting to say this, and that's been my part of my multi-slacker movie idea. Is that it's not an idea. I think that's where some of it started in the art department. Being an artist yourself, David, you probably weren't there at that time, but is that
No,
something?
I got to Austin in '98.
Okay.
But I've heard that referred to. Now, how does that connect up with what I've heard referred to as the New Sincerity movement?
You know what? New Sincerity. I just found this out heard that the other day, and I'm like, what are they talking about? Well, that's what MTV was trying to impose.
Oh, okay.
I don't think that was what was going on in Austin at all. It was the big boys and those, grunge bands. And they had started earlier in the 80s even, and kind of matured around 85. And you got the Buttholes, and everybody on TV suddenly, and Daniel really didn't fit into that grunge thing at all. So it's kind of amazing that he shot right through.
Right. Yeah.
But,
Daniel kind of invented his own category in a way.
Yeah. It sounds like you've taught at several different places.
Mm-hmm. A lot of places around the country, and I teach a lot of places, in fact, in Canada too, but I teach a lot of places here now, actually. I teach at ACC. I teach at Laguna Gloria for the Contemporary. I teach at the Darty Arts Center. I teach at the Waldorf Private School. I have private students. So, yeah, I teach quite a bit all over the place.
Well, those are all big names for people who don't know Austin.
Right.
They're all fine
Yeah.
institutions.
I teach painting, drawing, life drawing, design, all the 2D stuff, basically. There's a whole art scene this underneath the surface of the music scene, like there always was, and it's still there. The whole east side of town is full of galleries and studios and little people struggling in their garages to make something. And I'm sitting in my studio right now. And there's also the whole musical thing, and there's a whole filmmaking community, not just the people around Linklater, but a whole bunch of it. And then there's a whole Poetry scene, there's a whole literature scene. It's all going on. Yeah, it's all there. In fact, I consider myself really, really lucky to come here, because when Kathy and I got married, I was living in the wilderness in Wyoming, and I thought, oh no, I'm going to move to a city. It's going to kill me. But it's the opposite. It brought me back to life. It's such a flourishing art scene.
What part of town do you live in?
South. The 04, the famous 04. Yeah.
And let's ask the question: how do you feel about AI? Have you tried it?
From what I've seen, it doesn't appear to be any kind of a threat, because it doesn't seem to have a soul. It seems to be exactly what it is, computer generated. It looks very empty. It's pretty but empty. So I don't think in fact, it's probably going to be incorporated as a tool more than the enemy. It'll just become this tool that artists are using to make their own art with. But it doesn't, beyond the copyright idea, of course, but I don't think it's going to be, I don't think we're going to, there was this thing a few years ago in Hollywood where they were going to, remember the idea of they were going to generate actors and they wouldn't need actual actors anymore. And I don't think that's going to happen with artists either, where they're going to generate art. We won't need artists. Same as musicians, generate music without musicians. People are going to keep making art. People are going to keep making music. So we might coexist. The worst will be we'll coexist.
What comes to mind when we say the word Slack?
For me, it's the whole, it's this, which people are always, saying is gone from Austin. I think that attitude's still here. I completely see it. We all live in the art world, Andy. The same thing. When you're a creative and you live art life. Everybody's, the whole Slack lifestyle, the whole Slacker world is still happening.
That's good to hear.
I think so. Multiple jobs where people, so they can have time to do their art. I know everybody I know is like that.
And that's because your property taxes are like twice what ever or more.
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, we all live in these $1 million houses, and we're scrounging money to buy oil paint. But
I mean, is it like 20 grand for taxes?
I don't even know, to tell you the truth. We have an accountant that I'm just like, you deal with that. It scares me. You deal with it.
I keep hearing these ridiculous numbers.
Yeah.
And thinking, well, if we move back, maybe we'll go to Waller.
Yeah, there you go. I know where there's a house empty.
I think it would be very expensive to buy.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah. I want to do a seance in Daniel's house.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, I really do.
The Hellier crew would love that.
Yeah. Well, Dick said he'd give me permission to do it. And, technically it's his house. So, but
well,
yeah.
I'm really liking this idea. Actually, I might take you up on that.
That would be great. It'd be incredible, and film the whole thing and, document it.
That'd be a great multi-slacker ending or something.
I would love to make contact with him one way or another. I mean, if it's possible.
Oh, he would come through.
Oh, absolutely. A chance to perform, and maybe he's well now. Who knows? I hope he's well now.
Hi, how are you?
Hi.
You probably start telling us stuff we don't want to hear.
Right. Yeah.
Truths,
Yeah. Oh, geez. He would give me. Believe me, if the whole Jesus and heaven thing was real, I'd never hear the end of it.
He's going to save your soul when you bring him through.
He tried for 20 years. He might as well keep trying now.
I did not realize, David, till just this moment that you're wearing a Mothman shirt.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Look at that. Look at that.
Yep.
One we don't have.
My nephew that lives in Morgantown, West Virginia, designed this and printed them up. Yeah.
Can I see that again?
Sure. There it is.
Wow.
They live in Morgantown. My niece and they're printmakers, and he designed a whole line of Mothman, Indrid Cold stuff. In fact, he took my Indrid Cold painting, turned that into a T-shirt as well. I'd like to know, Andy, if I could, I didn't know that there were Mothman prophecies about the JFK assassination or Bobby Kennedy assassination. What was that? Where did that come from? I had not heard that.
It's somewhere in Keel's stuff where
I have to find it.
Most of it's MLK, but he did mention RFK. And then there was some weird stuff with Frank Strange's saying that Valiant Thor told him about it, that it was going to happen before it happened. And Strange's claimed to be on Thor's spaceship when the assassination occurred. And Valiant Thor was trying to stop it. But that's a whole nother genre almost of ufology.
The whole Valiant Thor thing is pretty big. It's a whole subject.
The MLK assassination has other links to the area through Mound Labs in Ohio, where the shooter of MLK's mother worked. The shooter of MLK's mother worked at the place that had authority over the TNT area and the DLA, Defense Logistics Agency site in Point Pleasant. So they were nuclear facilities. This place, Mound's Lab, had authority under the nuclear whatever agreement. And yet one of these guys, and it was a CIA created lab from the beginning by CIA Director McCone, who replaced Dulles. So Dulles made sure to have a guy come in who would be a hardcore CIA man and help out the nuclear industry in every way possible and get the nukes onto satellites and rockets and missiles and everything they could. And that's kind of what Carbide was doing in those days. A lot of nuclear missile stuff.
Sounds right. That is quite a connection right there.
It sounds like, David, you're also kind of a 911 researcher.
A little bit, mostly based around, just to me, there's just one unanswerable question for me that I've ever had about it. It's just this. I don't know I really don't know what happened. I don't. It could be the story we hear, honestly. But why wasn't there the remnants of 90% of an airplane on the lawn in the front of the Pentagon? Why weren't there big wings lying there on the ground? Where was the tail section? Wouldn't that still be there? I didn't, so that's my question. And I can't find an answer to it.
That's one of the big ones now. And did you ever see the footage of the missile going in?
I have. Yeah. And it looks to me like a missile. I mean, it's a missile, right?
How did that slip through?
Yeah, it's pretty odd. I mean,
the only way it could slip through is if the bombs went off inside the Pentagon and there was no plane. Then they might float the idea of a missile to confuse you.
Oh no, that's interesting. Yeah, I never thought of that.
But and how much evidence do we have about what happened on the inside? It looks like something went through three walls.
Mm-hmm, three walls.
Yeah. That's what they were saying. I guess there could have been 3 bombs blown off in the walls to make it look like a missile came in or something. But there's so many other things. The landing site in Pennsylvania was previously a coal mine that already had a hole there, and there was no wreckage there either.
I didn't know that.
There was no wreckage. There was no wreckage at that place. There was like somebody threw out a couple of chairs or something. Right. Really terrible job. Like I could have done better. Yeah,
I mean there are pictures of people hauling wreckage away from the Pentagon site, and it's not enough wreckage to build a Piper Cub, let alone a whole, Boeing 727. It's ridiculous. And if it burned, wouldn't there be like a big plane-shaped scorch mark? I don't see that either. So I don't know.
Right. And it would be very difficult to fly a plane in like that at that speed. Yeah. Practically impossible for any trained pilot. And those guys were not trained. They were not trained hardly at all. If you look into that whole thing, Daniel Hopsicker.
Something's really wrong there.
Daniel Hopsicker tracked all those pilots down in Florida, and they were all working for this training at this CIA airport. That was caught dealing drugs and stuff.
Oh, I didn't know that.
None of the hijackers were Muslims. They were all big party guys. They weren't fundamentalists. They were.
They were strip clubs and all this stuff.
Clubs, and he talked to the girlfriend, Muhammad Atta's girlfriend, and she said, "Oh yeah, that's bullshit. There's not a, she was like a stripper or something." But I mean, there's holes throughout the whole thing. Of course, I devoted way too much time looking into it, probably, and some people probably thought I was off my rocker because
I still watch that Loose Change documentary every once in a while. It's pretty amazing.
But they think I'm off my rocker because I had a vision of it when I was a kid.
Oh, I didn't know that. Can you hear about that?
Yeah, well, that was I had a friend who claimed to be having saucers land in his yard. And he also claimed Mothman was hanging around. We built a shrine to the Mothman in his shed, and that was all well and good. But then one day he goes, "Well, I got this vision about a World War III in 2001. I'm like, "Yeah, sure you did." And he goes, "No, I can show it to you." And he said, "You just have to prick your finger." We did a blood brother thing. We stood in this spot in his yard, turned a certain way, and boom, I got the vision. And it was followed by like my whole life, like timelines. We can talk about timelines, especially with the concept of AI, because the AI could think on multiple timelines or parallel processing. So, of course, the human brain isn't good at that. So when I woke up, I couldn't remember anything. All I get are feelings like I'm on the right timeline, but I get, I'm trying to get back. I got off track in Austin, and I'm still kind of trying to get back to where I think I was supposed to be. And it's just a feeling based on whatever's in my unconscious is, some of it might leak out and give me a heads up on, and this has happened many times where I've gotten a heads up on stuff that might save my life or someone else's. And so that keeps happening.
So when 9/11 happened, did you connect it up? Right? You said, "Oh, this was that."
Yeah.
Wow.
But it kept getting more intense. Like at first it was a kind of a real vague feeling. And I don't know how many days it took for it to settle in. Oh my God, that was exactly what Tommy was talking about. But I think we were all in shock and I wasn't thinking straight, but it didn't take long. I mean, I knew the next day it was a fake, that it was not fake, but an inside job.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, and then I saw the shaman right after that. We happened to be going to Mexico. He did this thing where he put a vision of a burning lotus in my mind, where he was leading us to a sweat lodge and we drank some special juice. And I started to see this thing he was talking about. It was like burning fire floating right out here. And it was very similar to the vision. So the vision kind of occurs right here outside your third eye. And so he was like activating that. And that's when the details started coming in. And I was like, oh, now I remember everything he did and how it all went down, because my mind somehow was cleared. I don't think he would have put the vision, a fake vision in me, on me. He was just trying to get us to see the lotus. Because then you could, I guess it gives you, it's like some people take an antidepressant and after they take it, they feel normal. And they're like, oh, that's what normal feels like, and it gives them a guide for how to go. And so that putting that there was like a guide for me to see more into it. And so I could kind of sense those timelines, but it's also
trains your brain.
It's jumbled. And I guess when you're taking those two opposite drugs, maybe you got jumping going back and forth between those timelines.
So right now, then your sense of the timeline is you're on the wrong one, or you're halfway between.
Yeah, I feel like I'm about there, but it took a few years. I mean, because I got really waylaid in a way. My experience in Austin was, ended up that I just kind of, I kind of felt like I was ostracized, but I had committed to this project of filming people. So I've continued to do that, put my feelings aside. So what that did was it kind of poisoned my marriage in a way to my ex, because she started interacting with these people from the past who had these gaslighting. They were basically just gaslighting me, and she saw a way out of the marriage or something to use that against me. So it was a very bad divorce where she's lying about everything and gaslighting me.
Ooh.
And it was vicious. And it's almost not her fault in a way, because I think she's a narcissist who probably can't really see through it,
So sorry, that sounds terrible.
Yeah, it was very tough. But, that was the most productive time for me in a way, because I was able to do work without her. Once she was out of my life, I had way more time to get stuff done. And really my career flourished after that.
I was looking at how much stuff you have accomplished. It's amazing. I mean, all the books and all the collaborations and all the stuff with Keel and Barker's work and the film. It's incredible.
Well, I'm kind of like, I guess I'm a workaholic or something, or I have that same thing that drove Bruce, or have some of it, not to the degree of Bruce or Daniel, but some of it.
It's
really going. And I think what was that?
It's inspiring.
Oh, thank you. I think the difficulty of it helps, or you grow from it. And so I'm just kind of watching my own consciousness, trying to be aware of things, be kind, keep working, don't get distracted, because there's still a lot to do.
Yeah, just jump from island to island.
Exactly. There's so many funny videos you could do with songs, all the songs we have. We have hundreds of songs. And that's one thing that kind of excites me is the crazy kind of videos you could do with AI, if you want to get back to AI at all. I guess you said you didn't feel it was a threat. Maybe it's a tool. I mean, I think it can be a tool.
I think it will be.
Because I can draw anything in front of me, but it takes a long time, and I'm not really good at drawing things that are imaginary. Like Daniel could just imagine.
Incredible.
Oh, there's the things. Yeah. So for me, generating the imagery is time consuming and all that. And I felt like I could do a reasonable job just doing photography, and I could get a lot more work done with photography because I'm essentially just trying to frame a space for people that shows an emotion or shows something about my life or interior or whatever. And having it be in pencil versus silver is not that big of a deal for me, although I know it is for some people. And I'm sure you get some therapy just from putting the brush on the canvas.
Definitely. Absolutely. Yeah, for me, that might be one of the few places where I feel completely relaxed is when I'm painting, drawing. Yeah. The only thing I want to say about, there's one more thing I think it's important to say about Daniel. Later on, when he was very, very, very sick, and he was, you know, he got kind of a bad reputation. He would do 4 songs and walk off, and he was, you know, that whole thing. He got kind of, a lot of people started trash talking him and a few other things like that. That the real guy was really a sweet, gentle, loving human being inside all that. And I just want to make sure that that's recorded somewhere because it's, you know, they get mixed together and it's unfortunate.
Well, I'm glad we got that down, David. And my work is done here. I have nothing else. I'd like to thank you, David, for being on. David Thornberry, everybody. We're going to have him back for some CIA or JFK double Oswald stuff.
Let's do it.
Jaci Kousoulas, Dr. Bill Kousoulas, David Thornberry, thank you for making Mothy Talk 3 a success. I think people are going to love it.
Thank you for having me. This was fun.
Good night, everybody.
Good to meet you, David.
Bye,
we'll see ya.
Bye-bye.
We got one more song. Thanks for coming out tonight. It means a lot. Thank you. This one goes out to all you Nazis out there. Okay, here we go. Oh, honey, you know it just ain't right. All the fun things, there doesn't have to be a flight or a fight. Conquer overkill. Love will always win. You're my honey, so delightful. I'm a fool for you, like a Bible. Love will always win again. Love